1927. And we're going to go to the Oliveira House in Lafayette, and we are going to take video of that house. George, what do you plan to do with that video?
Well, the hope is that we would put it together with some other pictures of other older homes in the Burton Valley area and have a program to show to members of the Historical Society and anybody else that's interested sometime in November of this year.
Well, that sounds very good. And then you might have houses in the Lafayette area?
Yes, hopefully trying to find those which have some of which people have some knowledge of their either the time when they were built or how they grew or what the house developed into. Problem is that many of the houses have been modified to such a great extent that there may be a core of an old home, but that home core is completely surrounded by some modern improvement that's been put on in some very recent time, like maybe in the 30s or 40s.
Okay. Now, will you look at these other houses by yourself, or do you have some people who might be knowledgeable about these houses?
Well, for one, Les Johnson, who grew up and lived in the Burton Valley area, or at least from the high school ages on, and Carl Rodebaugh and Bill Wakeman, who are people who have lived, and in fact Bill Wakeman was born in Lafayette and presently lives on St. Mary's Road.
Okay, well that sounds like a good program. And then this will be donated to the Historical Society?
Yeah, and the advantage of it this way is that somebody with their own VCR can come down and borrow this from our tape library and take it home and show it to their family or school class or whatever it might be.
Oh, that sounds good.
And presumably preserved for a long time.
I would think you might want to do one other thing, George, and that is to have a second copy and keep the original copy in the files and not allow it out, and just loan out a copy so that you don't risk losing all that you've strived to record.
Yes.
So you like that idea?
Indeed.
All right.
I wish I had thought of that.
Yeah. What a handsome smile. All right. All right, let's go on our way, George, and we'll start videoing the Oliveira House.
Okay. Some traveling music, please.
We are on Los Palos Drive. It is September 15th, and we have now come to Oliveira Lane. And we'll go look at the Oliveira House, which is down Oliveira Lane. We are at the end of Oliveira Lane, adjacent to the bike trail, as you saw a man just wheeled by. And we are viewing the Oliveira House, which has a for sale sign. Or a builder sign. Potter and Company will be constructing a residence here for an Orinda couple. George Wasson mounting the steps of the porch of the Oliveira House. I don't think anybody's home. No, that's unfortunate. This Lafayette heritage will be demolished shortly, next week, according to George.
Well, the house, from the early pictures that we have of it, which were taken probably in the early 1920s, let's say, or something like that, show that the front of the house was really facing north. Pictures that we have of the Mancini children standing or sitting on the porch would make the house appear as though it originally had a front entry in the north side of the house, and that's the north side is that porch is directed out in a northerly direction. The double windows and the single window on the wall that's facing north are shown in that old picture, and then there was a porch that went from there in a westerly direction. It looked like the entry was from the porch and went into a doorway that went into the easterly direction. The original house was supposed to have been just 4 rooms and single wall construction so far as we know, which means that there were no studs and no space between walls so that you ran wires or anything like that through it. And of course that picture also shows that if this porch were not in the picture you see right now, behind the house was the outhouse, and that's clearly shown in this picture. Again, so far as we know, the original 4-bedroom or 4-room house was the part that was bought in 1902 or something like that by Joseph Oliveira when he bought 42 acres of Burton Valley here for something like $5,000 in gold coin, and he plucked out the gold coin. And the history seems to show that he had immigrated to the country not many years before that. So a lot of this whole area down here was a part of the Oliveira Ranch. And eventually the children and grandchildren have moved on into other houses. There are other Oliveiras that live further east of here up on the hill, and there's another Oliveira that we think lives over on St. Mary's Road, or at least a house that was built by one of the Oliveira family. We don't know, I don't know at this stage, how the lots were subdivided or who acquired what, but at least we know that sometime in the late 30s or 40s, we know that this was all just pear orchards and walnut orchards, and Les Johnson drove tractors for one of the Oliveiras who farmed in this area. The railroad right-of-way, or the trail, is on the old Sacramento Northern Railroad right-of-way. And Bill Wakeman tells me that the access to this house was really just a little lane that came in from Glenside north of here, to get into this place. Now we're looking at what would be the west wall of the house. There's a couple of little shuttered areas there just off of that porch, which could have been part of the original part of the house. There's a cooling cupboard in there. Those vents permit air to come up from the bottom and out through the top and keep things cool in the summer and perhaps a little bit warm in the winter. The big portion that's in the northerly direction here is the added-on living room and part of the porch. And way at the back there, which would be in the southerly end of this western wall, is a laundry room, which we know was added sometime probably in the 50s or 60s or something of that sort, maybe even later. The full lot here, of course, is a full acre. It runs from out there at the front where we started, just off the trail, way back to the creek. The creek, which is I would say a good, 200 feet, or 200 feet or more back from the front of the lot line.
This is at the rear of the Oliveira property, looking toward the front. The house is behind that foliage. George Wasson is heading towards the house. This magnificent piece of property was reputed to have been sold for $300,000, and the Oliveira house will be demolished to make room for the new structure. The dog next door is commenting on the encroachment of people in his terrain. The creek is behind us here. This is the south side of the structure. George is exploring. What have you got there, George?
Well, this is the entry into the basement area of the house, which we really believe was probably built after the house was built. That is, it was excavated underneath here. There are some old timbers under that hold the house up, and I'm not sure exactly when they were in, but there's a foundation wall around the outside of it that's poured concrete, and we truly believe that that must have been put on sometime after the house was originally built.
Take a look down below.
That would be good if your camera will handle that kind of light.
I can handle a camera as we enter.
All right.
Go ahead. Standing at the entry to the house and looking into the interior.
You're recording now?
Yes.
This is an added-on porch, which is the most recent addition to the house as far as we know. Back over in this direction is a laundry room and a half bath, but again, were added some years after the house was, long after it had been lived in. The kitchen, I'm not sure anyway exactly how that was oriented or how it was laid out. The 4 bedrooms part, or four rooms part of the house would certainly have to be in this direction, and that's, I'm pointing in the easterly direction. That cupboard that I talked about from the outside is this cupboard over here with storage space. And vents at the bottom and at the top. But obviously the kitchen is, modernized. Parts of the houses. And one thing, while you're staying there, when I said that there's a single wall construction, you can see the thickness of this wall. It's just solid wall from one side to the other. There's nothing in there, no studs. There were no wires. Of course, when the house was built, there was no electricity either, so you didn't have to allow space in there for running the modern day electrical systems.
What do you mean solid wall?
Well, this wall, we think, is just all wall. There's
Like plank timbers that thick?
yeah, well, maybe not just timbers, but it could be lath and plaster or something like that, but there's no airspace in there. And what we propose to do is to at least preserve some pieces of these walls, both interior and exterior, to show how houses were built when they were built around the turn of the century.
The closet. And this was one of the...
This is the single window that when we were standing outside, we are now on the inside of the north wall.
Yeah.
And that's the single window, and we were standing out there near that fence.
Okay, to the front of the house, side facing the bike trail. And I'm standing in the closet. Which is at the front of the house between the two bedrooms.
But it obviously was an add-on because the original pictures, of course, show the plumbing or the outdoor
Room towards the rear of the house. How many bedrooms are there here in this house, George?
Well, there are 3 bedrooms in the house. It was originally described as a 4-room house. And that could be these 3 rooms in this hallway, plus the kitchen, which is back over here. And I'm not that familiar with how it was laid out when it first was occupied.
Okay. We're in the so-called 3rd bedroom of the house now?
Well, no, I think this was probably, this door here was probably the entry door into the house, because when I described, see, this is the double window that we looked at from the outside.
Okay, the double window, you're peering out of it now, okay.
And in the early picture, and this was a porch, and it shows a doorway right there. So I believe that the original porch was where the camera is about now, and that you came up onto the porch, and this was the entry. This was the entry into the house. And there may have also been an entry around behind to get into the kitchen area, back door or something like that, which would be quite typical. And this whole room here is the add-on, and the fireplace is an add-on too. And that doesn't show in the original house.
This is quite a large room here.
Yes, this, it would be a nice room to have if you were using it for historic preservation, because you could have it big enough for meetings, you could have it big enough for storage, and big enough for wall space for cupboards and all those kind of things, but it makes it complicated to move it. And I don't know what the foundation is underneath this part of the house. I would suspect that well, it would be a little bit more difficult to pick this up and move it.
Okay, George is locking up the house. We have just had our inspection of the interior, viewing each of the rooms of the Oliveira House. September 15th, 1988, just prior to the demolition of this house to make way for an elegant new dwelling of an Orinda couple.
Walnut tree here is going to be saved by the owner, the new owner, and that's one of the original walnut trees. The garage that's behind it is nothing of any significance, because it certainly was added sometime later on. But from talking to Les Johnson, who, as I say, drove tractors for the Oliveiras, he says that there used to be a lot of sheds that went back there, kind of in a westerly direction, oriented kind of like the garage is, where the Oliveiras kept tractors and various other farm equipment. And you can picture that in an olden time, there probably would have been space in there for a couple of horses and 3 or 4 wagons or trailers or tractors and discs and harrows and all kinds of things. Because this really truly was a working ranch.
Goodbye to the Oliveira House.
Well, yes, and as Bud suggested, maybe we could still have a dance in the living room before the house goes down and call it the farewell dance or something like that. There's room enough in that living room for at least 2 squares of square dancers, and Bill Wakeman says you could have a bunch of Scottish dancers doing their dances in there as well.
At the same time?
No, not a
summer cabin for folks who live down. They'd come down here and visit the creek. That they camped on the creek and so on and so forth. Yeah. And they grew apples, and they'd polish the apples individually and take them across the mustard field across the street and catch the train with their apples and ship their wares off to town. This particular picture is the front porch as it was, you know, in 1980 when we started to remodel it. And then this is the original garage back there. And
have you done all the remodeling yourself?
Yeah, well, I've had it done, but
yeah.
You know, I've done a lot of it. But
you've lived here ever
since the early 80s. But it was that was the front. It was really old and very small, and it was overgrown.
Yeah.
And the couple that came and went through the house was very impressed with the fact that it's no longer a summer cottage. It's a you know, the homes. That's what's happened. I guess everything in this area they've overhauled and remodeled.
When do you think it was built?
Oh, 20s or 30s. They've added on the front and added on to the side. They added a bedroom. They added a living room. It was originally just a kitchen and a bedroom, a bath, and a small living room. And this is going out the back porch.
Yeah.
So you can see the kind of architecture it was. It's kind of like Oliveira's. And this is the original garage.
And the old from a cottage to a beautiful place there.
Well, it's double the square footage anyway, you know, and it makes it livable nowadays. But
well, now. Tell me again what parts of the house. I'm looking at the front of it now. What parts of it?
Well, from the side front door there to the left, to the birch trees is original. And then that back side porch you see there was added on, but it still looks pretty much like it did. That's this architecture here.
And the front porch out there is all new.
That's all new. The front was where the double front doors are was just a window, just a front window. Here's a good picture. This is the front. It was just plain. This is the side, and that's the front.
Is that the same birch tree?
Yeah, I've had to take some nice branches off of it. It's infected, but we're still hoping it'll hang in there a little longer. It was really pretty, the big gnarly branches, and we counted the rings in that thing, and it's got about 75 rings in it, you know. This is a shot of the front yard, how overgrown it was, with the horses in the front yard. We're standing right where this car is, so you can see how overgrown the house was, and the backyard. So it was really thick.
You've done a good job, yeah.
Well, maybe good. You know, the line just like we found it here, you know.
Yeah.
And then we've added all this. You can see what we've added on here. But it was
Well, it's fun to have the records.
yeah, well, this is where we are right now.
Too close there.
Now you're getting into it now.
Oh boy,
Go ahead, Ben.
we got a lot of memorabilia here. Ben, you must have some.
To a collector, and he'll give you 15 cents.
Well, there's a couple things in there I can show you that are like that, you know, like the
Look
old...
at all those individual things hanging on the wall.
Well, now we
there.
put those up there, but we gathered them, you know, but they just...
Just miscellaneous around the
place, yeah, there's just... and around the side there's more. He's young. He's only about 6 months old, so he thinks he's...
That'll wake you up in the morning.
Yeah, and you know, every neighbor has commented how they like it. But it's
Look at
we've
that.
had to add a new roof to it, but it's really old. You know. And
You know what does become valuable for the right person is these barn boards here like that.
yeah,
the
weathered
stuff, you
wood,
know,
yeah. Well, that's why I've resisted painting that, because
if you
there's
can,
places.
find the right place for it, people really go for that.
Yeah, they do. Good and weathered looking stuff. We've added a new roof to this thing just because it was coming down, but yeah, there's not much. You know, we've found, like they saved everything, and so we find piles of wood in the blackberries. And we want to keep the blackberries, so we have the quail population around. So I didn't mess with it too much. But you should have seen the old rotten wood that was in it. It really just saved everything with that. I don't know why they would think of stacking it in the.
You can.
What did I say?
Well, you said they came by one day.
Oh, we were
The old couple.
after we moved in. An old couple just came by one day, and they live in Rossmore, and they were a really cute couple, and they were in their 80s, I guess, and they used this as a summer cottage, like I said, and they came by and said, "Would you mind if we came in?" And they just looked around the house. They saw the old stove. We have an old 4-leg stove in there, and that was their original stove, and they liked that. And there was the old fireplace is still in there, and they liked that. So they were really thrilled with the fact that there is something they recognized around here nowadays, you know. And they told us about taking the train and walking across the field to catch the train on what is now the bike trail, and that
Well, you're
brought a lot
glad
of
to
fond
see
memories.
them,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
Oh boy, yeah.
the black and
Faded a bit, yeah.
the black and yellow tile, and it was in excellent shape. The only thing new in that picture is the refrigerator here, but the stove is right where it was, and the bathroom was like this. It was pretty, pretty. You probably the light wrong. It's probably
Well, it's doing its thing. I won't be able to tell whether these are going to be.
Well, these are neighbors. Was back here. You couldn't see this part of the yard we're in from the front of the yard. It was just completely overgrown with.
In my backyard that is supposed to be 200 or 300 years old, but he says this is over 500 years old, and it's so symmetrical. So he's added the gateway and the fence and makes it into a regular show place. Just think of the power that's in that oak tree to make all those leaves come out every year.
Yeah.
You know, they drop off, come back.
And the amount of
Is that, maybe that's not a deciduous. I don't know.
no, it's
I guess it's a.
That's one of the deciduous
I
oaks.
guess it's a deciduous tree, but just think of the internal power that the tree has there to do that every year. Back up, he's got a tennis court back there.